Good evening. Welcome to the show. Channel 7's top investigative program, Spotlight, is itself in the spotlight tonight with new details of how its staff allegedly solicited drugs and prostitutes to secure their high-profile interview with Bruce Lehrmann and then destroyed documents and messages when they were subpoenaed. Former Spotlight producer Taylor Auerbach has now written 3 untested affidavits. They've been lodged with the federal court by Network 10 in its application to reopen the defamation case brought against it and Lisa Wilkinson by Lehrmann. The affidavits have now been released by the court, so I can share the details with you tonight. And they paint a picture of the extreme lengths Channel 7 was allegedly willing to go to convince Lehrmann to discuss the Brittany Higgins rape case on national television in 2 separate interviews for the Spotlight program.
That you bullied her on at least one occasion. Is that right?
No, not at all. In fact, I think it was adduced in evidence in the trial that that was not the case.
Well, the affidavits make for shocking reading. And the question tonight in media circles is what the new 7 chief executive, Jeff Howard, will do about the allegations those affidavits contain. Allegations made in the affidavits of an unethical and dysfunctional culture within Spotlight, which instead of reporting the news, has itself now become an embarrassing front-page story. There's speculation about the future of executive producer of Spotlight, Mark Llewellyn, at the 7 Network. He has a reputation for being a highly talented producer, one of the best in the business. But the allegations about Spotlight are a serious reputational issue for Channel 7. There are also questions about what 7's head of news and current affairs, Craig McPherson, knew about the extent of the spending and staff issues at Spotlight. As we reported last night, entertainment expenses claimed to have been spent on Lehrmann included expensive dinners, golf in Tasmania, and $10,300 in massages. In his affidavit, Auerbach claims the spending even included a visit to a brothel. He writes, and I quote, "I recall that monies paid by the applicant for illicit drugs and prostitutes that evening at the Meriton and the following evening at a brothel in Surrey Hills were reimbursed to the applicant by 7 through per diems." Auerbach produced the receipts from Sensei Thai Massage on November 22nd, 2022 to support his affidavit. The affidavit will be tested in court when Auerbach is subject to cross-examination tomorrow afternoon. 7 is also facing questions about whether it complied with 2 subpoenas to disclose communications between its employees and Bruce Lehrmann. There is also the allegation from Auerbach in his affidavit that he deleted material related to Lehrmann. He claims this was his interpretation of a conversation he had with 7's lawyers and Mark Llewellyn. In June 2023, Auerbach claims his boss, Mark Llewellyn, told him, and I quote, "I've just gotten off the phone to the lawyers. I've decided to wipe all contact that I've had with Bruce and documents he gave me. I can't tell you to do the same, but it might be a good idea." Auerbach states in his affidavit that he immediately deleted any communications he had with Lehrmann on his phone. He says that in the days after the Spotlight program went to air, he received a call from a lawyer working for Channel 7 who told him, "I've heard that 10 and Lisa are not happy about the broadcast and might come after us. It might be a good idea to have a look at everything, especially the raw interview tapes." Well, Auerbach says that he understood this meant that he should delete material which might be damaging for 7, which he did. Auerbach also alleges that Bruce Lehrmann gave the program material, including Brittany Higgins' private text messages, which was originally obtained in the aborted criminal trial. This is contrary to Lehrmann's own evidence in court, where he and his lawyers denied handing over any material. Auerbach claims in his affidavit that 7 newsreader Angela Cox allegedly saw him and Bruce Lehrmann photocopying documents, and he recalls her saying, "Looks like you've got a big story coming." A Seven spokesperson said the network strongly rejects the false and misleading claims relating to the broadcast of material in the Spotlight program. They said Seven did not condone or authorise the alleged payments to Lehrmann referred to in the affidavits. As has been previously reported, the person involved admitted to the misuse of a Seven corporate card, and all unauthorised expenses were immediately reimbursed. Seven notes that these proceedings remain before the court. Now, Auerbach's own behaviour will be the focus of cross-examination from Lehrmann's lawyers tomorrow when he appears in the federal court at 2:15. And he flew in from New Zealand last night, as you can see on your screen, to face a media and legal storm, all of his own making. Video today showed him breaking golf clubs. But Auerbach is understood to claim that the video was a parody. His HR file and any psychological assessments will also be subpoenaed by Lehrmann's legal team. The top-rating Channel 7 investigative television program is just the latest player in this saga to face public scrutiny. From Brittany Higgins herself and Bruce Lehrmann, to politicians like Katie Gallagher and Kimberly Kitching, to Shane Drumgold and Brittany Higgins' own lawyer, Leon Zweier, so many of those involved in the Lehrmann-Higgins case have faced a public storm of controversy related to aspects of their involvement. The latest chapter in this toxic story will play out tomorrow in the federal court. You have to ask, can it get any worse? Well, by this time tomorrow night, it probably will have. Now, still to come on the show tonight, my exclusive interview with Alan Dershowitz. He speaks about Donald Trump, Joe Biden and Israel and whether there should be a ceasefire. It's a strong interview, and that is coming up a bit later. Also tonight, how our green energy transition is being blamed for putting the livelihoods of blue-collar workers at risk. My political panel will join me to debate that later on. But now let's go to the announcement today by the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese that businesswoman Samantha Mostyn will be the next Governor-General. She's the current chair of the Women's Economic Equality Task Force, and she said today that her legal background will bode well in her new role.
My legal training, including time spent in courts, from the Magistrates Court here in Canberra to the Court of Appeal of the New South Wales Supreme Court, ensures that I understand and deeply respect our institutions, the rule of law, and in particular, the democratic will of the Australian people when it comes to our constitutional arrangements. It is this that will guide me in carrying out the duties of this office.
But not everyone is happy with her appointment, including my next guest. But the Australian reports today that Mostyn has previously likened Australia Day to Invasion Day in social media posts, and conservative political lobbying group Advance says her appointment is an insult to mainstream Australians, and that it shows that the Prime Minister cares more about the activists and elites than the people working hard to make this nation great. Well, let's bring in now former Labor Minister Graham Richardson and former Victorian Liberal Party President Michael Kroger. Welcome to you both, gentlemen. Michael, I want to start with you and get your reaction to Sam Mostyn's appointment today.
Well, I wish her well, but and I hope she does a good job. But I think it's a profoundly disappointing appointment. I mean, why not a distinguished scientist or neurosurgeon? Why not a leader of one of our great farming organisations, a great community servant? Why does Albo always have to pick someone from the inner city woke brigade, constantly on the government payroll, former Labor staffer? He is constantly in the throes of the inner city woke left. I mean, everything he seems to do he collapses under the pressure of activism and activists. The Voice was the worst example of that. Israel's another terrible example of where he just collapses in the face of pressure. And to appoint someone like Sam Austin, who I'm sure is a fine person and will do a good job, but it does send a terrible message. I have to say I agree with Advance. This is not the right appointment for Australia. There are many people who have given great unpaid service to our nation who could do a very distinguished job rather than someone from the inner city, woke left. No, not a good day for Australia and a bad day for the Albanese government.
Well, Richo, what do you think about this? Do you think it is a win for the woke brigade, as Michael Kroger says?
I think I'd have to concede there's probably some truth in that, yes. It doesn't mean it's only the woke brigade, though, that would be happy about it, but they certainly would be.
I mean, Richo, who would you have appointed, or who do you think would be some fine candidates?
Well, I guess...
I've put you on the spot there.
Yeah, you have somebody like Nelson. You know, I'd look at him and look at the job he's done, guarding, if you like, Australia's wartime heritage. I think someone like him, a pretty honourable guy, I'd go for him.
Yeah, Brendan Nelson as
Brendan's very good.
The War Memorial. Yeah. Now, this is an interesting story. X, what we all know as Twitter, is threatening to sue the Australian government after it was slapped with an $800,000 fine for a post which made disparaging comments about a transgender activist. Now, X did remove the post, but it has also confirmed, according to reports today in the Daily Telegraph, that it wants to challenge the order to protect the right to free speech. Michael, this is quite fascinating.
Look, it is. I don't think that post was something that should necessarily be taken down. But at a wider level, Sharri, the internet and social media are the Wild West. You know, we've seen some shocking things over the years put up that are not taken down. And I simply say this, I take to the view that these people are publishers. They are no different to the Age newspaper, the Sydney Morning Herald or the Australian newspaper, 3AW or 2GB. These are publishers like Sky News. If it can be published in the Age newspaper, great, put it online. But the broadcasting standards that apply to the media in this country, whether it's Sky News or, you know, the West Australian, that should apply to social media. These people are publishers. And, you know, you can't put the stuff in the Age newspaper. There are editorial controls, or on Sky News, there are editorial controls about what can go on air. They have kill buttons on radio stations to stop malicious defamatory material going to air. You put all of this salacious racism and abuse online, and it's particularly harmful for the young women who suffer abuse, etc., etc. Sooner or later, the West has to self-correct and stop this Wild West activity on social media, because it is killing, in an emotional sense, a generation of people throughout the world, particularly young people, Sharri.
I mean, Richo, you know, these tech giants say it's very difficult to control the content online, but they make billions of dollars from users. A lot of them now have advertising on their platforms as well. They take our news content mostly for free. So do you think they should be more responsible when it comes to what they publish?
Well, I think they should be, but I don't think they ever will be. One of the things is that if it's salacious, if it'll titillate, then they'll publish it. Because it'll get them, presumably, they think it'll get them some more people to participate in their activities. So, of course, they'll go for it. Doesn't make it right, but I don't think you're going to see an end to it anytime soon.
Yeah. Now, US President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping held a phone call yesterday, the first interaction the leaders have had in months, or since November. Look, the diplomatic relationship has been problematic, as you'd expect, although the call was described by the White House as, let's have a look at what the White House had to say, as candid and constructive. No detail as per usual. They did reportedly clash over the South China Sea, economic issues, Taiwan. Michael, you know, there are questions over Biden's handling of the China relationship, and this is a key point, or this is one of Trump's main arguments about why he'd do a better job. He says he'd be more intimidating to the likes of Vladimir Putin and Xi. What do you think?
I think that's right. I mean, the Chinese, as we know, play the long game. So they have a call with Biden. Is that a good thing? Absolutely, it's a good thing. International dialogue between countries who don't get on that well, of course it's a good thing. But they're just waiting him out. They're waiting till November to see him defeated, and then they'll move on to dealing with the next person. So they've gone through the motions. Is Trump more intimidating? Yeah, of course he's more intimidating for all the reasons we know and we've seen. And I can see him doing something on the Ukraine with Putin, which may well resolve that conflict. I think it presumably will result in some part of the Ukraine in the east there being given to Russia, but I think he probably will be able to settle that dispute. I mean, that's the type of person he is. He's the art of the deal, as we know. But as far as the Chinese are concerned, they're just waiting Biden out.
Yeah. I mean, Richo, this is really one of the things that the rest of the world does care about when it comes to whoever will be the next president of the United States. You know, how they'll manage these international conflicts, Russia, Ukraine, the Middle East, the threat of Iran, and the threat of China, because we know that Xi is highly ambitious. He does want to invade or reunify with Taiwan. He's stated these ambitions publicly. So this foreign policy is actually a critical part, and we need to hear more, not that we have a say in who the next president will be, but we really need to hear more from both Biden and Trump about how they will deal with these challenges.
Well, we do. I mean, if you look at Taiwan, that's the issue in the world that could spark a war. More than any other issue, more than anything in the Middle East, the Taiwan problem remains. And it's a huge problem because you've got two sides absolutely dug in, and trying to get a compromise from that is well nigh impossible. There's bugger all chance of it, frankly. So we have to sit there and look at this precipice and say, are we going to jump over? And there are a lot of lemmings who are saying yes.
Yeah. Just in terms of the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, we've seen a couple of polls this week, both News Poll, a poll for the West Australians, the Nightly, also Herald poll last week, which shows that Labor is struggling. One of the polls really had Labor behind in WA. You two are very experienced, or the most experienced political operatives in this country. Michael, do you think Labor is slipping so far behind that they might not even get to minority government?
Well, it's possible. They're on 78, and he'll form he won't get 76. He won't get a majority. The best he can do is minority government. But if he loses 11 or 12 or 13 seats, Peter Dutton may well get more seats in the reps than him, and then Dutton is in a position to negotiate with the crossbenchers. Of course, the Greens will support Albanese, but once you get a majority of seats in the reps, as I think Peter Dutton may well do, then it puts pressure on the Teals and the Independents to give him the first crack at getting to 76 seats. And I can see them losing seats in WA, Boothby, one in Tassie, 2 or 3 in Victoria, 2 or 3 or 4 in New South Wales, and maybe one in Queensland and Lingiari. So I can see Albanese going into the high 60s if this continues. He needs to reset his government. The Voice basically killed this government. It's been a slow leakage of support ever since, and now we know with the cost of The Voice, over $500 million, including donations, was spent on this.
Yeah.
And Albanese is seen as too woke, too in the city, and he's losing a lot of support in the suburbs, Western Australia and Queensland.
And a hypocrite with his jet-setting lifestyle. Richo, some people have said to me that it's feeling like 2010 when it could end up being a hung parliament. What's your sense of this?
Well, there has to be a chance of that, yes. I'd say that there's a 50-50 chance of it. But, there's also the other side of the 50 is that Albo could get up. I mean, he's quite remarkable, Albo. For people who follow politics, he's just seen as that guy next door. People like him. Yes, he would lend you the lawnmower. He's that sort of fella. And he wouldn't necessarily ask for it back next Saturday. So I think people go for people like that. And so Albo's got that likeability factor always in his favour.
Look, he is likeable, Michael Kroger, in person. But I don't know if you'd want someone who'd lend you the lawnmower necessarily as the Prime Minister. You want someone who has a proven track record on the economy, on dealing with the cost of living, on dealing with border security, immigration, foreign policy, standing up for a lack of social cohesion in your own country. What do you think?
Yeah, well, of course, likeability isn't the most important factor federally. It is in the state politics, in my view, but federally you need to be respected. Respect is the most important character trait to have in a federal leader, and I'm not sure Albo's got the respect of everybody. He fell into the position of leader because Shorten buggered up the 2019 election thanks to Chris Bowen. Albo got there, the Morrison government at the end of their life. He was in the right place at the right time and became Prime Minister. Good luck to him. I mean, he's achieved things that even great people like Richo and I didn't achieve. So, good on him. It's a great achievement being Prime Minister of this country. But if you'd said to people 10 years ago, Albo will be Prime Minister, most people would have thought, no, he won't be. And that's why I think he's certainly headed for minority government at best. I just don't think he's got the respect of the nation. And I think today's appointment of Mostyn as Governor-General is probably another nail in his coffin with a lot of people in the suburbs and rural Australia.
Which takes us back to where we started. We've come full circle. Thank you so much for joining me tonight, Graham Richardson, Michael Kroger. Now, coming up, one of the best in the business, Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz joins me to discuss our ludicrous call for a ceasefire with a terrorist organisation, plus his prediction of what's going to happen with Donald Trump and his criminal cases. Stay tuned. That interview, Alan Dershowitz, after the break. Welcome back. Well, renowned Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz spent 50 years at the prestigious university. He says he's never seen in those 50 years the anti-Semitism that we're seeing now in university campuses and a rise globally. He's also a former lawyer for Donald Trump, and he has a prediction about how the cases piling up against the former president will end. And he shared that with me, along with his thoughts on leaders like Anthony Albanese and Joe Biden, when I spoke with him a bit earlier. Look, we're seeing growing international demands for a ceasefire. Is this possible with Hamas in control?
A ceasefire now would be a victory for Hamas and an invitation for them to keep their promise to do it over and over and over again. Hamas cannot emerge from October 7th with a victory. And right now, it's winning. Right now, it's winning. It's turning world opinion against Israel. It's having international institutions demand essentially a unilateral ceasefire. Look, if all the hostages are returned, I can understand a ceasefire, at least a temporary ceasefire, but the end result is to make the world safe against Hamas, because if Hamas wins in Israel, they're coming to a theater near you. We already saw it happen in Moscow. Terrorism was essentially, in the modern times, invented by the predecessors to Hamas, al-Fatah and other radical Palestinian organizations. And it's been successful, and it's spread around the world. And it came to a theater near Putin in Moscow, and it will be coming to a theater near every democracy unless Hamas is defeated.
Do you think the demands for a ceasefire and to stop the war on Hamas are analogous with stopping the war while the Nazis were on a rampage during World War II?
Well, Goebbels wrote in his diary that if the world, if Britain and France had attacked Germany in 1935 and 1936, they could have defeated Nazi Germany and would have saved tens of millions of lives. And by allowing Germany, in violation of the Versailles Treaty, to build up its military to the point where it could conduct the Holocaust and kill millions and millions of Russians and Europeans all around Europe, you would think they would learn the lesson. You have to stop evil when it still can be stopped. You cannot allow it to grow to a point where it's impossible to stop it. The big difference between the 30s and now is that Israel exists. and therefore there will never be another Holocaust. Israel, the nation state of the Jewish people, with its military capacity, will never allow another Holocaust to occur. What we're seeing now are efforts to try to weaken Israel and try to turn the Jews back to a situation where they can be victimized, but Israel is never going to allow that to happen.
What do you say to the arguments that Hamas can't be defeated because it's an ideology?
The same thing was said about the Nazis and the fascists in Japan. And when the United States and Great Britain and Australia and the great allies destroyed the Nazi leaders, they destroyed the Nazi ideology. And although there still remain some Nazis and some fascists in Japan, essentially the German people and the Japanese people learned that if you follow the ideology of Nazism and Japanese fascism, your life will be terrible. And if you allow yourself to be rebuilt by the Marshall Plan and by the rebuilding of Japan, your life can be better. And I think that's the message that has to be sent to the Palestinians, that if you want your life to be better, opt for some kind of a two-state solution and reject Hamas's call for the total destruction of Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people. So yes, an ideology can be defeated if there is defeat, a total defeat of the armies that support the ideology. World War II proved that.
Professor, the majority of reasonable people support a two-state solution, but does that seem difficult, if not impossible, right now with Hamas as the governing body in Gaza?
It's true. Look, the New York Times today had an op-ed by a leader of the Palestinians denying a two-state solution, saying he wanted one state. Now, that's impossible. You can't have the Jews and the Muslims of the Middle East joined together in one state any more than you could reunite Pakistan and India. There has to be a two-state solution, but it can't be created in the wake of Hamas's terrorism and brutality. It has to await some time, but the structure should be built toward the goal of a two-state solution over time.
Look, I expect you don't follow Australian politics too closely, but our Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, has been urging Israel to have a ceasefire. He also hasn't been standing up to the explosion in anti-Semitism that we've seen since October 7. Very little, if at all, any leadership on this issue. It's quite a similar approach that Joe Biden has taken. What do you say to these Western leaders who seem to be putting politics ahead of clear morality in defending Israel's right to exist and standing up against the anti-Semitism?
It's not even a question of morality alone. It's in the best interests of Western democracies to defeat Hamas and the ideology that stands behind Hamas. And there have been some great Australian prime ministers, I've met with some of them, who have been very supportive of Israel and some who have been less supportive of Israel. The same is true of American presidents. It's in the interests of both of our countries and in the interests of all of our allies in Great Britain and Canada to stand strong with Israel and to stand strong against Hamas and against terrorism and against the attempt to build a kind of caliphate around the world. Because remember that the people who stand behind Hamas will never be satisfied simply with the destruction of Israel. They want Islam to dominate the world, and they don't want to achieve it by democratic means. They want to achieve it by terrorism. So every Western democracy is at risk. Israel is not fighting only for its own survival. It's fighting for the survival of Western democracy, of the Judeo-Christian tradition. As Elie Wiesel said once, it starts with the Jews, but it never ends with the Jews. The Jews are the canary in the mine. But if the Jews are defeated by Hamas, there will be terrible consequences for Western democracies.
Just on Trump, because you've been very vocal on the Fani Willis situation, where do you think this is now headed?
Well, I think there'll be some convictions, and I think many of the convictions will be reversed on appeal. Many of the cases against him are simply a function of trying to prevent him from running for and successfully running for president. How the voters will react to this misuse of the system is a question that none of us knows the answer to. But it's very important not to allow our justice system to be hijacked for partisan purposes and to be weaponized. I personally am not a supporter of Trump politically, but I am a supporter of constitutional rights, regardless of whose constitutional rights are being violated. And today it's the constitutional rights of Donald Trump that are being massively violated in an attempt to prevent him from becoming president.
Well, the entire justice system in the United States is politicized. Do you think the criminal and civil cases against Trump will impact his ability to become president? Will any of them see him end up in jail, or are they just distracting and leading to a loss of funding?
Well, I think it's unlikely that he will end up in prison, but it's very likely that he'll end up with some convictions, and maybe some will occur before the election. The special prosecutor prosecuting him in Washington and in Florida has said that he wants to see a conviction before the election so that people can take that into account in who they're voting for. In my mind, that constitutes some form of electoral interference. And I would like to see people decide who the next president is based on the issues that matter to them: the economy, immigration, peace in the world, the Middle East, the environment, a range of issues that are important. It shouldn't be influenced by current criminal and civil cases. Those should be resolved after the election rather than before, but they are going to be, some of them at least, decided before the election.
Professor Alan Dershowitz, I'm so grateful for your time.
Thank you very much.
Isn't he impressive? Well, coming up, we'll get the latest from the federal court on the sensational twist in Bruce Lehrmann's defamation case against Network 10. Plus, Ross Greenwood will join me to break down what's happening with interest rates. You don't want to miss that. Welcome back. Well, as we've been reporting, less than 2 days before a verdict, Bruce Lehrmann's mammoth defamation trial now reopened to hear fresh evidence. And that comes in the form of affidavits filed by Network 10's lawyers. And it includes an affidavit signed by former Channel 7 Spotlight producer Taylor Auerbach. Senior reporter Kenny Heatley joins us now. Kenny, we now have seen that affidavits by Taylor Auerbach, and they are explosive.
Sharri, it does. Former Channel 7 Spotlight producer Taylor Auerbach alleges in his affidavit the lengths Channel 7 went to secure Bruce Lehrmann for an exclusive tell-all interview that aired in 2 parts last year. In his affidavit that has now been filed with the court after 10's application to reopen the trial was successful, he describes nights out allegedly at the expense of 7 in January 2023. Mr Auerbach says in the affidavit, "I recall that monies paid by the applicant for illicit drugs and prostitutes that evening at the Meriton and the following evening at a brothel in Surrey Hills were reimbursed to the applicant by 7 through per diems. I no longer have a copy of this invoice." The evidence which is yet to be tested in court includes allegations a Randwick apartment was provided to Mr Lehrmann in Mr Auerbach's name, separate to the Balgowlah property Mr Lehrmann has been living in for the past year. And on top of that, expensive dinners, a round of golf in Tasmania and over $10,000 in massages. In the affidavit, Taylor Auerbach also alleges Bruce Lehrmann provided 7 private text messages between Brittany Higgins and an ex-boyfriend and allegedly used a 7 network photocopier to copy documents in his possession. Mr Lehrmann has denied any wrongdoing. The 7 network has released a statement strongly refuting what it says are false and misleading claims relating to the broadcast of the material of the Spotlight program. According to a 7 spokesperson, the claims in the affidavits have been presented unchallenged. 7 has never revealed its source or sources and has no intention of doing so. 7 notes Mr Lehrmann's court testimony last year that he was not the source. Furthermore, 7 did not condone or authorise the alleged payments to Mr Lehrmann referred to in the affidavits. As has been previously reported, the person involved admitted to the misuse of a 7 corporate card and all unauthorised expenses were immediately reimbursed. 7 notes that these proceedings remain before the court. Ten's lawyers argued in court that by allegedly providing Seven with the documents, it amounts to an abusive process. Mr Lehrmann's lawyers objected to reopening the trial, saying the new evidence is trivial and not relevant. Justice Michael Lee has delayed his verdict until at least next week. Sharri?
All right, and that was Kenny Heatley's report from the federal court a little earlier. Now, for the first time in 2 years, there was no discussion of hiking interest rates in the RBA March board minutes. Joining me now for where this is all headed is Sky News business editor Ross Greenwood. So great to have you on the set,
Sharri,
Ross.
lovely to be here.
Now, this is significant, but do you think it's a case of Michelle Bullock not wanting to fall into the trap of Philip Lowe when he got those predictions wrong? Is she a bit gun-shy now? So we actually don't know where they're headed.
Oh, she's handled this pretty well so far. The media conferences, which the Reserve Bank resisted for a long time, she has come out and suddenly started to communicate a pretty strong message. But what it says is that the Reserve Bank did not even consider raising interest rates. So for the first time, that's giving a clear message. But the question is whether that message is being misinterpreted by the community and by a lot of investors right now. We've got a record stock market. We've got record property prices in most capital cities right now. Now, the reality is that high interest rates are not supposed to produce record prices. They're supposed to do the opposite, to actually push demand down. But at the moment, you've got very strong demand. And this is one of the reasons why now it's suggested the Reserve Bank for a long period of time may do nothing. So the first interest rate cut that most people are expecting in September this year, and maybe 3 cuts from then on, maybe the first cut doesn't come until well into next year. And really, that's because the interest rate rises that we've seen haven't had the effect of genuinely quelling demand in our community.
I mean, while we have had a lot of interest rate rises, and no question, they've absolutely hurt people. They've caused pain because people took mortgages out on the assumption that they weren't going to rise. But interest rates are still at historic lows anyway, aren't they?
Close to historic lows, that's right. So despite all of the interest rate rises, they're well below their long-term average. And the second thing also to bear in mind is that while most people have had jobs, and remember that last month the unemployment rate fell, it didn't rise as expected. So that means that really people are able to cope. The real crisis happens always when people don't have a job. And that way, they've got nowhere to turn. And that's when really people start going to the banks and going broke, foreclosing on mortgages. Yeah. And that's when you suddenly start to see property prices fall really aggressively. That's not happening.
I mean, even the RBA was predicting that employment was going to rise. I mean, Michelle Bullock said that herself in a speech late last year, and we haven't seen that. You know, it went up a little bit to 4%, came back down to 3.7%. So it has held up remarkably well.
Which is great news, right? Yeah. Great news, because if people have got jobs, guess what? They can pay their bills. Even though they might be struggling, they can pay their bills. If they don't have a job, they can't pay their bills. Second thing is, for the government, it is brilliant. So remember that we are dragging in so many more migrants now. So net migration last year up by 580,000. The total population last year up by close to 700,000 people. Think about that in 1 year. But the fact of the matter is, most of those people, adults, found jobs. And that means the government collects more than half of its revenue on an annual basis from PAYG taxpayers. So that means if there's more people out there working, guess what? The government gets more money, which is a reason why, if it doesn't get there, it's going to be very close to producing its second successive budget surplus.
Well, exactly. I mean, the high immigration levels are basically partly why we've managed to avoid recession, although we have had that per capita
but
recession.
It does cause problems for the housing market.
Yes, for housing supply. Well, let's have a look at that, because new stats out just today from the ABS on population growth for Australia.
Yes. And this is going to frighten a few people, I will tell you.
Yes, tell me.
So I'm going to show you the scenarios they've got. They've gone out 50 years with different scenarios as to where Australia's population could be. So right now, Australia's population, give or take, is 27 million people. But that means our big capital cities, Melbourne and Sydney, getting out towards 4.5 million people. And we know the pressures that's causing on housing and also infrastructure. So if we have a look at the chart, you'll see the first one basically shows us exactly where it is. Now, 4 lines here, 4 scenarios. The one at the bottom says no new net migration. And if that's the case, we're just relying really on our natural births and deaths for our population.
That's if Pauline Hanson's the Prime Minister.
Right, yeah. So as a result, the population falls over time. That's not good for any economy. yeah, our economy would go backwards. The second one from the top is basically where the Reserve Bank and others presume Australia's population will be. But the top one, which is broadly where you start to see Australia's population get out beyond 40 million people over that period of time. So this is a lifetime of many people who are watching now.
Is that around 46 million?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's getting out 35, 40, even to 45 million people. So consider that during the lifetime of your children as they get to about your age.
That's
it's really astonishing.
Thought.
So, but if you think
if housing is hard enough to get into the housing market for young people as it is, if you're competing with
so if we're talking
what percentage is that? Another 30% more people?
Well, it's not quite a doubling, but almost a doubling of that. It's about 80% more people on what we've got now.
We've got around
27 million, 26 million people now. But think about this. If we've got 45 million, so at the moment we've got, say, 27 million, 4.5 in Melbourne, 4.5. So a third of our population lives in Melbourne and Sydney. If a third of our population live in Melbourne and Sydney, and we've got a population of close to 45 million, that means 7.5 million people in Melbourne and in Sydney. So the best part of 3 million more, the doubling almost of the population in that period of time.
Please, no, Ross, can we not have... I mean, the thing is, Prime Ministers in the past have been very open about wanting a big Australia. But Albanese, like in so many other policy areas, he never took a big Australia to the election. He never told the public about this. And then suddenly, he gets into office and Labor has just had this big Australia policy, 500,000 more people.
Well, this is about propping up Australia's economy.
But without telling people that that's what they were going to do.
But propping up and also playing catch-up, they would claim, from COVID. So that's their claim, right? But the reality is that Australia's population is growing at the fastest rate it has since the post-war era in percentage terms. So this, of course, is also putting enormous pressure, not just on the housing market, but on infrastructure as well. And if we consider even the problem of the housing market is there's not enough workers. So the prices of building is going up. People don't build because they can't make a profit. And where are the workers? The workers are building infrastructure projects that Australia is also playing catch up on from the past 15 years or so. So it's almost a vicious cycle for this country at the moment that government is not going to easily solve.
No, and also not for now because we're out of time, but the conversation does also need to be had about where the migrants are coming from and how we want the makeup of our country.
Well, there's no doubt about that. That is absolutely key, and youth is the key. There's no doubt. Youth and skills are the absolute key.
Right, we're out of time. Ross Greenwood, it's so much fun having you in studio today. Now, after the break, Penny Wong's tough talk on Israel, plus why Labor's rush to green energy has been slammed by traditional owners. My political panel will join me next. Well, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and Foreign Minister Penny Wong have both expressed their outrage after an Australian aid worker, Zomi Frankham, was killed during an accidental Israeli airstrike. Penny Wong used the opportunity to say that Israel needs to change direction.
And I have said publicly, as has the Prime Minister, we want an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. We have said directly to the Netanyahu government that their actions are meaning that they are losing support amongst many countries. And I would say again what I've said to them directly, that the Netanyahu government must change course. I will also say we continue to expect Israel to comply with international humanitarian law.
All right, joining me now, Labor MP Daniel Molino and Nationals MP Keith Pitt. Welcome to you both. Now, we spoke about the tragedy of Zomi's death last night. There's an inquiry into it. It was completely unnecessary and devastating. Keith, I thought it was interesting to hear Ray Hadley this morning speak about the difference in rhetoric and tone of the reaction by Anthony Albanese and Penny Wong to Zomi's death compared to that of Australian woman Galit Carbone, who was murdered by Hamas on October 7.
Well, that's exactly right, Sharri. And what we see now is another tragedy, a grieving Australian family, and that's tragic all on its own. But we can have less tragedies, in fact none in the future, if Hamas would just release the hostages that they hold. If Hamas would not undertake terrorist attacks that we saw previously some months ago. And This is just a really awful outcome from an Australian woman that undertook some extremely high-risk activities and has paid the ultimate price.
Yeah, I think obviously the death is tragic, but it doesn't mean that there should be a ceasefire. There were 1,200 Israelis, including an Australian, killed on October 7, and Israel does need to finish the job of killing Hamas. Otherwise, what have we been doing for the past 6 months, Daniel Molino?
Well, thanks for having me on, Sharri, and good to talk to you too, Keith. And look, it's obviously a tragedy. And can I just say that my thoughts go to Zomi's family and friends. But look, I think Penny Wong's statement to me, and also the Prime Minister's, are very much in line with those of our close allies. Conservative British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said that Israel's conduct has become increasingly intolerable, his words. And one of Israel's staunchest allies, Joe Biden, has said that he was heartbroken and outraged. And he's also said that when it comes to protecting aid workers, Israel must do more. So I think Penny Wong calling for an urgent investigation and saying that Israel has to change direction, particularly when it comes to matters like this, I think it's very much in line with what our close allies are saying. And to me, it's a very appropriate response, and one I think that would reflect where the majority of Australian opinion would lie.
Look, Penny Wong didn't need to call for an urgent investigation because Israel already had announced that it was going to conduct one. But I don't agree that that's where the majority of Australian opinion is, that there should be a ceasefire. I think the majority of Australian opinion would support destroying the terrorists. Absolutely. Of course, everyone wants the loss of civilian life to be zero. If there has to be, minimal. I noted that Greg Sheridan pointed out Keith Pitt earlier on Sky News tonight, I think he was on with Andrew Bolt, that in every war in which Australia has been involved, there has been some very sad loss of civilian life.
Well, this is an unfortunate part of war, Sharri. This is what happens when you have conflicts. When you enter a war zone, there's an incredible risk. And unfortunately, those risks have come true. But once again, I think you make a really good point. Hamas is a terrorist organisation. They're a listed terrorist organisation in Australia, and it is actually unlawful to support them. And I can understand exactly why the activities the Israelis are undertaking. But why won't they just release the hostages? That sounds like a pretty good start to me, and I think that would move us much more quickly towards a potential ceasefire.
All right, let's have a look at this report in the Australian newspaper today that the traditional owners of southwest Victoria are upset with the Albanese government for what they say is a complete lack of appropriate and meaningful consultation over an offshore wind farm. Daniel, has there been enough consultation here with the Indigenous owners of the land?
Well, look, from what I understand, there was very extensive consultation. And when you look at the outcome, there's a 20-kilometre exclusion zone around the island that takes into account cultural protection issues. And indeed, it's not the end of the process. There's going to be another stage when the feasibility licence process is undertaken, and there'll be further consultation with traditional owners during that process. Look, I think for me the key thing is that consultation doesn't mean that everybody who's consulted with gets everything they want. Meaningful consultation means that you listen to people carefully and that you take their views into account in a substantive way. From what I've seen of this outcome, basically the parties that have put views forward have had concessions made and it's a sensible outcome.
All right, look, we're out of time for your response, Keith Pitt, but fascinating issue, this fight between Indigenous owners and the Albo government. Thank you both for joining me tonight. That's all we've got time for. I'll see you tomorrow at 8. Big show tomorrow night. Here's Paul Murray.